with a number of different initiatives, alliances, collaboratives, networks that are looking at whole systems change at everything from the local to the global level. And now what kind of comes out of that work, a lot of my work is focused on convenings, on the use of dialogue and other kinds of gatherings, and how we facilitate both small and large groups virtually as well as in person, and blend together our virtual capacities with what we know how to do in person, or learn from what we've developed in person and how to and apply those kinds of processes virtually. So now what is kind of the latest, the product of 10 years of experimenting and playing with different things, and really excited that sumApp showed up through the network weaving community, and I got connected to them, and Jim partnered with me on this, as well as Christine and Tim, to make this map possible.
Can I just ask, does anybody else, Ben, your voice is a little quiet to me, and I'm sort of straining to hear a little bit. Is that the case for others? Is that going to be a problem for you?
I can speak up a little bit. Is this better?
Yeah, thank you.
Project. I could try taking off, not using the headset.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear me at all. Well,
okay. Now we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah. Is this better than using the headset?
Actually, it is.
Okay.
Louder anyway.
Yeah.
Is that, other people feel that way?
It's good.
Okay.
Thanks.
And the construction noise outside, where I-95 is being rebuilt here in downtown Philly.
Can't hear it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I don't know if there's more to say about me. I kind of feel like I want to dive into the map presentation.
Cool.
Well, let's do that. So Christine, you want to stop sharing your screen then so Ben can take the reins?
Yep. And
awesome.
Ben, did Tim give you the link? Tim made a new view with what we just were talking about. And Tim, did you put the link in the chat?
I do see that link. Okay, yeah.
So just use that. Okay.
Then use that first.
And just for folks too, as Ben is presenting, feel free to utilize the chat box. Like, you don't have to hold those questions inside of you. Drop them out here so other people can see them. Chances are they probably have a similar question, and we'll come back to that and check in on it to answer them.
If you want to change your location in the box there, just roll over the 3 dots in the upper right of your square, and you can rename, and we can all see where you're from. And a lot of people have done that already.
All right, so are we ready to go here? Timer going. All right, so I'm going to start by just sharing a screen from the Nahuatl website, nahuatl2019.com. So this is the home page. Sorry, let me just. And Nahuatl, unlike many, probably the typical application of a network mapping tool like this, Nahuatl is a pop-up gathering. People please mute when they're not talking. So the latest edition of Nahuatl took place from October 14th through November 22nd. The next edition is planned for March 23rd through May 1st of next year, and then do it again on a twice-a-year rhythm. So this was the third thing called Nahuatl, and maybe the second thing that looked more or less like what I'm about to show you here, although it was also the first time that we used mapping tools. So in previous editions, people gathered for dialogue. It's generally about this idea of the challenges of being fully human in this time of crisis. It's a global gathering that emphasizes dialogue, but also learning together, and a gift economy element as well. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to exchange at various different levels. And people registered for Nahuatl using sumApp. And I will show you the registration page so you can get a little bit of a sense of that. And I gave them 2 options. So one was to just fill out a quick form with their name and email, and then I would manually enter them into the sumApp system and send them out an invitation to complete their profiles. Or you could go through the standard process, which I identified as having 5 steps, and do that on your own. I just checked the data. It was interesting. We wound up with about 320 registrants by the end of Nahuatl, and 170 of them used the quick sign up. Some people used the quick sign up and then went on and to register themselves, but most of those people, I did. And they came in sort of in bits. So mostly I was doing that one at a time, but occasionally I would do a batch upload through a CSV file. And I only sent out, the registration process started in the end of September. So now it began October 14th. And this is a calendar that we use to share information about the live Zoom call. So most of what took place in Now What was on a series of Zoom calls. There were over 80 of them that happened over the 6 weeks. So it started on the 14th. We started the sign up about 2 weeks before that. And you can just sort of get a sense of how this is kind of an open calendar that filled up. And one of the things I want to show you here, you see the different colors, and we'll see this in the map too. So I was sort of centrally convening the purple and the blue, but the yellow were conversations convened by members, and the green and the orange were convened by partners. There were 26 organizations that partnered in Now What as well. And I don't know if it's worth showing you a list of those on the website. Probably not. Let's just jump over to the map. So first we'll see, this is the way the map, sort of the main view of the map by the end of Now What. So you can see this, some ways maybe somewhat typical. Here I am in the center. So it looks a bit like a bullseye, but we have a lot of other things going on, and then a whole set of sort of orphans on the outside, part of which could be because a number of people registered and never completed a profile. Some people did, but didn't do the connections portion. But you had a pretty good cohort of about 100 out of the 300 that did do this here, that showed connections and created the complexity of the map. What do I want to say? Let's maybe move to this wonderful time-stamped version of things that Tim created. And so this gives you a sort of a series of snapshots of how the map grew. So this was as of September 30th, maybe 3-4 days after the initial invitations went out for the map. And you can see, that's me in the middle there. 8 days later, we're getting a bit more complexity. That's interesting that we're seeing orange there, because I didn't think, maybe that just began as well. So partway through, do we have the connections tab? Type of connection, yeah. Here are the different connection options that I created. And that's one of the things that I love about sumApp and the integration with the profile is the flexibility there. So partway through, we had sort of 5 levels of kind of how much you knew one another and whether you were maybe working together on Now What. These are the order change. Anyway, I added this someone I would like to meet to the thing, because part of the core of what Now What is about is people connecting and doing real network weaving. It's kind of one way to think of it as a network weaver's playground. So the orange, we color coded those separately to make them easier to see, and so those are starting to show up at this point. The other thing that happened right around this time, we're moving to the next view, is that we decided to add some organizations. We had, as I mentioned, there eventually were 26 different groups, networks, alliances, organizations that became partners in Now. And one of them in particular was really interested in being able to see how many of its members, it's kind of a network, the Evolutionary Leadership Community, which is an initiative of the Institute for Evolutionary Leadership. And they wanted people who were members of the community to see who their fellow members were who had showed up in Now What. So on their request, we put them on the map, and then they were able, so they put themselves on as if they were a person, right? But then they were able to proactively show who they were connected to, who all their members were, and then members could easily see that. So we're moving to another view where maybe that's going to expand a little bit. And then once we did that, we started inviting a few other of the partner organizations to do this as well. And I think eventually, we will in the next edition, it'll be a standard practice to invite the partner organizations to put themselves on the map in addition to individuals. And they're basically just doing it as if they are individuals. And we might create some tagging and some decorations to have them look a little different from the people on the map. But it was one of the things it immediately did is it took me much less out of this, much more out of the center of the map. It created much more complexity in terms of the relationships as soon as that happened. Another thing that's been useful in looking at this is that the map really did show how much I was central to this, which is logical as the lead convener and host. There were many other people, extending invitations, but the plan the next time is to have from the get-go, a core group of maybe as many as a dozen people who are in the center of the convening process, so that we have a much more dynamic and complex system showing up as we begin. So you can see here by the end of October, a lot more orange is showing up. So people are starting to make requests to meet others, and the map in general is evolving into greater complexity. And here's the kind of the final view of it now. What else do I want to say about that? Well, another thing is that I'm in the center partly because I took the initiative to go back to the map regularly and add connections as more people joined, right? And if you have a rapidly growing network map like that, it's pretty important that people have a practice of that. And I only put out probably over the 6 weeks of Now What, I put out a lot of sort of reminders using the really wonderful kind of, invitation email platform that's built into sumApp to tell people, hey, check out new connections here and add to them, et cetera, or complete your profile, all those different prompts. I use those, not super intensively, but fairly regularly in the first 2.5 weeks of the 6-week period. And then I kind of stopped. But people, so there are a lot of people who probably did not ever show connections or did it once, and those of us like me who are coming back in regularly to do that would appear to be more prominent in the network than in fact we are. So let's see, I'm going to show you, I've mentioned partners. So one of the views that we created on the map was one that listed all the partners. And when people registered in the questionnaire, one of the questions was, do you want to receive invitations from these partners? Again, the core process is lots and lots of dialogue in Zoom calls, in person. We also use an online platform called Sutra. So let's say, you're Kevin Jones's Gather Lab. Oops, sorry, that was a right click. Away. People, when they register, they say, I want to know, I want invitations from you. And as any one of these partner organization, representatives or, network leaders, you can easily go to this view. You can see everybody that's doing this. You can, of course, open up and look at their profiles, find out more about them, see individual email addresses. So you can do a lot of one-on-one connecting this way. And on request, I'm able to download this whole list for a given partner. And Tim and I worked together to figure out how to do that easily, which required a filtered view rather than a clustered one, which is sort of a technical thing. But anyway, we have this capacity then to serve each of the different partners in Now What in this more customized way. So another thing to show here is the geo map. I learned a little bit about how to do that. In the beginning, there wasn't, I think, a plan to use the geo mapping, and then all of a sudden Tim says, yeah, we should do that. And so the way the question was initially asked didn't quite fit with what Kumu wants in terms of that, but it's pretty good. So most of these people are fairly accurately placed on the map. There is, interestingly, this whole cohort in the Gulf of Guinea. Those are people that, that's where Kumu puts you if you don't have a location. And it stacks everybody in the same location on top of one another. So there are a lot of people there in the Gulf of Guinea, and maybe, other places like the San Francisco Bay Area. But that was a really nice thing to just get a sense of where people were coming from. And Now What? This guy's on a sailboat in Tonga over here. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, in terms of how people got engaged and what we were what was the value that the map generated, given that the main thing was, this was much more than a mapping exercise, right? That we were sort of using the map as a registration process and a way to, as a directory, a way for people to connect with one another. So lots of people got into that. And as you saw, they were making requests to meet one another and things of that sort. But I think even more basic than that, the whole invitation process was supercharged by the existence of this map, right? People would see it, and I could put, screenshots of it out into my emails and things like that. And people say, wow, this thing is cool. There's people from all over the world. I know some of those people. There's other people I don't know, but I know them. I read their posts on Facebook, whatever. It really brought this whole kind of network of networks, alive and visualized it for people. So I don't think we would have had over 300 people register for this if it hadn't been for this tool. The last edition of Nahuatl, there were about 160 registrants. But I think it really supported that. We created some invitations for people. So part of Nahuatl, as I mentioned, is a lot of it is conversation in small groups or large groups. And there was that calendar you saw of open calls on Zoom that anybody could join, including people that aren't even on the map and hadn't registered. But also people were encouraged to self-organize into smaller groups based around particular things that were of interest to them. And the map gave you a lot of tools for doing that. There were 6 different conversational themes, and you could sort by those. You could look at who's connected to whom and do a kind of a network weaving sort of a gathering. There's I didn't show you the skills view. That's a common thing in sumApp, but you could, we did some calls just for people that were interested in leadership as a challenge. And there were some people offering support for that and some people requesting support. And we went into the map and kind of picked out a small group that seemed interesting. A few of us decided to do this as a convening and did some custom invitations. So there's a video I recorded that I can share the link to as well that would just kind of ran through, here's how you could navigate the map and use all these functionalities to put your own small group together for dialogue around things that are interesting to you. And then we had opening and closing parties also for this. And by the time of the closing party, I created some party games, one of which used the map, was called You've Been Woven. And the idea was a small group would get together, you'd pick somebody on the map who looks interesting to you, but nobody knows. And you'd start looking at who are they connected to, what are they interested in, who else do you want to connect them to, record a little bit on Zoom, send them an email with a link, and just do this sort of playful network weaving. And I think that'll be a regular kind of weekly part of Nahuatl in the next edition as well. So I've dumped a lot of info out. You may have some questions. There's a lot more I could say, but I think I will stop there.
Wow, thank you so much, Ben. That is really interesting. Yeah, this is pretty much an open floor right now. So if folks have questions, go ahead and take yourself off of mute and I would say jump right in here. Oh, Kitty, I think you are on mute right now, and I saw you were trying to talk.
Oh.
There you go.
Yes, I'm talking now. Okay, yes. It's difficult because everything is translated in French, and I'm Dutch, and we're speaking English, so we have to combine things, like you were doing. So, I've one question. I have a website in France, and we have a Google Map, and we have a Go chart map, and everybody is busy on mapping. But this is so brilliant with visualization, and Nahuatl from Croatia brought me to your site or whatever. So I jumped on to join. But what I see in France, people, when they change something, like a Facebook address, whatever, they don't change it on the map. How can we say that it's for the quality of the map that people should update their information? How are you handling this?
And I'm sure a lot of people could speak to that. I think in the context of Nahuatl, helping people to see the value of the map as a tool is probably the best way to support their desire to have it be updated. And whether that's people who are actively engaging or just sending the message out, look, people are looking at this information, it's being used in all these different ways. So at the very least, take a little bit of time to make sure your information is accurate. It's also a little less of a challenge for us because this is a 6-week-long thing. There's an interesting question we didn't even get into for the next edition. How do we create the next map and what happens to this data? But that would be my short answer. Maybe other people have some thoughts on that challenge. It certainly is an ongoing one. But I think the more useful people see the map being, right, the more likely they are to do that. So bringing the map alive in different ways would be the key.
Yeah, I mean, Kitty, I'll just say quickly, like, it's been a challenge for my own network in that same sense as well, like getting people to want to, like, continue to keep their information fresh. They don't even keep their profiles fresh on our, like, online collaborative platform space, like our website. So, like, why would we expect them to do that? So what we do is oftentimes for my network, anytime we're getting ready to convene in person, we are really pushing the map. And we have a way of filtering in the connections tab around meeting times because that's when people are most likely to want to, like, share those connections. So it makes it more manageable than having, 500 names that you're trying to go through and expecting people to actually, like, do all that work. That was actually, I would love to hear more about that from you, Ben. Like, you have, I mean, there's what, 300 people on this map or something like that? What were some, like, tips that you had for getting people to share? Like, I'm trying to imagine myself going through and sharing 300 connections, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to do that. So, like, what were some techniques or things that you did to get people to really share that?
So there's a search bar, search functionality in Kumu, and that's the most basic thing, right? And it works not only for names if you want to find somebody, but for keywords. So often we did that in some of our network weaving. We would just do a keyword on, transformation or education or did some different things like that. And then, we had, you could filter in other different ways. What of the 6 different conversational themes people were interested in, which partners they were interested in, the skills, et cetera. So a lot of times we had a more specific way to go. And sometimes, the invitation was just to be playful and kind of, just zoom in and wander around, click on somebody, use the focus. That's the other really key button, right? That focus button to just see who's connected to that person and then sort of jump from one to another, right? And say, oh, they're connected to this person and, who are they? Look at their profile. What are they? So that was another thing that we did. I think having a core group that really understands how to navigate the map is key to getting the value, rather than expecting that everybody is going to do that. Teach people just the simple thing, like how to use it as a directory. You want to find somebody on the map, put their name in the search bar, and here's how you open and close the profile window. And it just works really well as a directory, or, see who they know with the focus button. I think anybody can learn that. The more complex stuff, you might want a team that's doing that as a service to individuals or organizations or networks that are on it. And that's that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we'll be pulling that team together for the next edition if anyone is interested. And there is a financial element to all of Nahuatl too. So we're still evolving that now, that piece. But the idea is you can actually, people can have this as a gig to do that kind of support work, whether it's network weaving or mapping or conversation hosting.
Hi, I'm new to all of this, so please forgive my ignorance. Maybe not this map, or maybe this map, I don't know. But then how is the map used to drive social change, social systems change?
Maybe Reamp wants to answer that question first. I mean, in the case of Nahuatl, we're driving change by making connections and having dialogue and moving resources around. And the map is one way to make the network of people that are showing up to do that more visible to themselves, and to sort of drill down into more particular areas where you might want to have a conversation or talk about where resources could go. But I think some other initiatives, it would probably be a very different answer for something like yours, Sarah, right?
Actually, not too different, Ben. Like, for us, it comes down to the relationships. Like, that's the most important part of the network, and that is it's those solid foundations of trust that lead to systems transformations. In our belief, that's our belief. So we're really interested in the mapping, especially in this lens of an evaluation tool, right? Are we designing practices or behaving in such a way in our network that we're actually strengthening those connections between people? We believe that to be true. We've never been able to show that until we started mapping. So now we can start to see this change over time and to see, oh, like, and are there different parts of the network where maybe we are doing a better job than others? Well, then what might we learn from that practice that we may be able to spread to around the network in other ways? Christine, I'm kind of curious, like if you had oh, Jim looked like he was going to jump in here. Go ahead, Jim.
Just real quick that, yeah, if you're building relationships, using the map to help build relationships to increase collaboration, then if you're asking in the survey what people's interests are, where they do their work, what skills they have to offer, what skills they need, then those become sources of figuring out how to gather together around those affinities. I don't know how well it works. It's supposed to work really well, but it requires people to take the initiative to self-organize. Here's all the people that are interested in my topic. I'm going to convene a session. And I think that's a lot of what Ben was doing in his map, but you could do it for social change purposes.
And of course, there's a whole other class of mapping, right? There's systems mapping versus network mapping. And for now, those tend to be very different maps, although some people I know are interested in how to bring them together. But, you know, I think REAMP famously did a whole systems map, right, on the power, the energy system in the Midwest. And from that, you can find leverage points and learn lessons about what's strategic for making change and what's not. But that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. So I'll just jump in terms of the concept of a social system map is a little different than the concept of a network map. I mean, it's essentially trying to combine the important pieces of both of those. The system map where you're looking for leverage points, and then using a social system map to understand not only what are the major leverage points in the system, but who's working on the different leverage points, who is related to, who is impacted by points in the system, who is so and who, like, who's benefiting, who's being hurt, etc., to start to understand not just building relationships, but building relationships across differences, or building relationships strategically to help help shift the dynamics in the system. So it's also a tool. And this is aspirational. We're not, I mean, I don't feel like anybody has developed enough of a practice around this to be able to point to having achieved it. But the idea is that that having a social system map helps us actually think systemically as well as relationally, and put the two together and be more strategic and leverage the strengths and the power within the network to shift those systems. That's like a whole methodology of learning that, you know, Sarah and I are probably the most, I mean, we think about this a lot, and we're really working on how do we create a methodology around helping networks learn how to think in this way and use these kinds of maps in this way. So very much aspirational, but the overlay of the system elements, which includes assets. Assets are part of a system. Strengths are part of a system. Influence is part of a system. The different perspectives, learning how to pull that all together and navigate it is the aspiration. Does that help, Sharon?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was taking notes.
It was a great question. I'm so grateful that you jumped in with it.
Yeah, it's important. Kind of the most important question.
I'm just kind of checking in on the time here, and I'm wondering if there's anything from the registration that you think would be really important for us to like raise up or talk about right now.
Sure. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll whip through the questions that you guys put in in the registration form. Excuse me. That those of you who are here, if you're here and you put a question in the registration form, I'm gonna read those. I'm not gonna read the ones for the people who aren't here. But so Sharon, you had another question. Can mapping? So first, I'm gonna read the questions, and then we'll sort of see which ones are the most important to address first. So. Sharon's the one she put in the registration form, can mapping occur by issue instead of people or organizations? Meaning, can the nodes of the different issues to be addressed and the connectors to the organizations that address them. I'll just answer that one quickly. Absolutely. If you put the issues, that's part of what I mean by the systems. If you put the elements of the system or the issues in your survey form, then you absolutely can cluster on those so that you can see the relationships. Anna, I hope I'm saying that right, said, I'm a complete beginner. I'd like to see the different things that can be achieved by social system mapping, some simple guidelines, how to use it, where to start, etc. I'd like to be able to use social system mapping in the next year. And actually, I think that's the only other question of somebody here. So maybe, Anna, do you want to say the pieces of that question that haven't been answered already by Ben's presentation so we can target the response?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's okay. I found this very interesting, still very new to me, but at least know where to start looking and finding out more about it. So thank you.
Great, great. Just to say to all of you, when you say this is very new to me, it's very new to just like there are, you know, this many people to whom it's pretty darn familiar, and half of them are in this call, and everybody else it's pretty new to. So don't feel bad about that. That's what these calls are for, is to help you get familiar. Someone was gonna.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. You know, I've been mapping for, you know, over a year, and I still feel like I'm crawling. Like I'm not even walking yet in terms of mapping, because it is like such a new field. It's, you know, it's really emergent too. So, I mean, Christine's advice, I think, is good advice. Like, just get started, because it's not going to be permanent anyways. Like, just start, because you're going to learn, adapt, and learn and adapt and learn and adapt. So, yeah, just like, you know, learning to walk or anything else.
I realize I jumped over some of sort of just the basics of what you can see about a person on the map, and I don't know if I should take a minute to just sort of quickly share my screen.
Do people?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, that's also one of those tough questions, right? Like, what is the right information to be gathering from people? And of course, like, everybody's context is different. So I always appreciate learning more about what other people are gathering for information too. Right. So I'm glad you offered this then.
So one of the things, you see these bars here, there were 6 different topics. There were themes, and this could be anything you want, right? What sector are you working on, or, you know, any data you want, but you can show those just visually with these colored bars. So in this case, it was which conversations people were interested in, and there's a key down here. Then there's this sidebar that opens up where as much of the registration, the profile data as you want, information can be put in here. So in this case, we asked people, you know, what would I like you to know about my work? You know, I mean, we asked people what songs, was there a music they wanted to suggest? We created a playlist. So you can get very creative and playful. It's completely flexible. You know, resources you want to share. So we collected a lot of information about that. But it's sort of, you know, we asked an identity question that was, so anyway, that's just and then you can see again with the focus button, and you can control levels of relationships. So here's everybody that, oops, I went up the 2 levels there. You can see everybody that Manuel has a connection to, or that said they have a connection to him. And then the different qualities of those connections can be shown by the thickness of the line or the color of the line, and what those connections are can be are variable. And if you go to the more advanced versions, you can actually write a little story about the connection you have with a person. So you can get into very detailed relational info.
So I'm just going to, thanks, Ben. That's great. I'm going to just clarify a thing that some of you might not be obvious. I mean, it's not obvious, and you might not understand this yet, which is what Ben is showing you is he's showing data that's been visualized in Kumu. So in Kumu, you can take a data set. It can be any kind of data set. It can be a spreadsheet of whatever, you know, times the buses leave from Grand Central Station. It can be anything. And you can define nodes and lines, and then you can put filters around the edges of the map. You can decorate the nodes and the lines based on components of your data. So The map that Ben is showing you is very customizable. It's very, depends on what it is, what you want to highlight, how you want to represent stuff. And that all happens in Kumu. And what sumApp does, which is what Tim and I developed this tool, sumApp gathers data about interpersonal relationships from a specified set of people that you define. It's a private universe. It's not like Facebook where it can just keep growing and anybody in the world can be part of it. You can control who's in that universe. It's limited right now technically by 1,500 people, and it's designed to gather that interpersonal, to ask you stuff about your interpersonal relationships or your interorganizational relationships with other people or organizations. And then we take the data from sumApp and put it in Kumu and define it in Kumu. So there's two tools. They feed into, the data feeds into Kumu, and then it gets, and then you can embed the map in sumApp. But they're, and basically sumApp is where you define the data you want to gather, and you gather it, and it's made to be user-friendly. And for you not to really have to understand how to structure the data in a way that Kumu is happy with, because that can be challenging. And then it's represented in Kumu. You could represent it in another social network analysis tool if you chose to. You'd have to tweak the data a little bit. But so both sides of that equation, both of those tools are super customizable. So it really depends on what it is you need to show. So anything you see in Ben's map is an example of a possibility that you could do. It's not like you're going to have X on this, you know, it's not like you have to have those little things around the edges or any of that stuff. It's very customizable, which there's a skill that goes with, which is part of what we're trying to help expand that skill set, because people want these maps, and there are more people who want them than can make them in Kumu. The sumApp setup is pretty simple. So I'll stop monologuing.
I'll just quickly add that, you know, the sumApp interface was really easy to use and set up. Jim was great in giving me kind of an onboarding into some of the different features. And then Tim was just amazing, and Christine in responding on the go to particular requests. Like, well, can we have the map show this? Can we have it do that? Can we? And so the map, you know, as I was using it, I was starting to realize where there was value or what we could do. And we were able in, you know, very short turnaround times to get all that to show up for people.
It's just Sarah, just Sharon is asking what's the sumApp. It's SUMAPP, and if you and there's a hyphen, it's SUM. The URL is sum-app.net. I'll just put it in the chat. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
No, Ben, I was actually hoping maybe you could say a little bit more, going back to what you were sharing about like the data that you're collecting on people and how you're showing that. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about how you balance like having questions that are like, you know, have categories, like check boxes, for example, in your survey so that you can cluster around them, versus having like an open-ended question. Like, how do you balance that? Or maybe how do you make changes then based on like open-ended versus having like a predefined field that you can then do some mapping around?
Yeah, I could probably look at the profile survey to do that to some extent. I mean, I think if you want to show something on the map, right, then the checkboxes are and lists are going to be much better, right? You have hard data. So, for example, you know, you saw the partner invitation view where people, when they completed their profile, could say, I'm interested in getting conversation invitations from Gather Lab or from Sutra, and you couldn't map that if people were just typing in the name. Although Tim did this, I think it was Tim, did this really great thing with the skills. The same thing with the skills, right? So you can, there's a preset list of skills, and then you can map those. But there was also, I put in just an other line where people could type in, you know, are there other skills you need or you offer? And Tim wound up just putting those all in a list in one of the main map views on skills, and you could just see, you know, oh, somebody's offering, you know, Kumu, advanced Kumu map decoration training or whatever, and you could click on that and see who that was. So that was a case where Tim actually created a, you know, inside the map off of text a link to. But I think it really depends, you know, is it how qualitative is the information versus, you know, how much is it, you want to be able to visualize it is probably the main dimension. I don't know if other people have thoughts on that. another big question is just how detailed do you want the profile to be? And I was actually quite astonished at how much people were willing to fill out for this engagement. I got some pushback on it, but it was a little, for the most part, and almost everything was optional. So I'm a big fan of not requiring too much in these surveys. So make it as long as you want, but tell people, don't answer things if you don't have the time or don't want to.
I wanted to add along those lines in a map, Christine added a description field about relationships. And so you could put in a description about how you knew this person, how you got to know them, or what you thought was interesting about them. So there were a lot of appreciations, and you could read those. And so as you scroll through the map, it kind of becomes a love fest where you're seeing, oh, wow, this person that I know and respect really respects and loves these other people. And that shifts the field of the community as well. It's really interesting impact.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
We may have to upgrade our subscription to add that feature next time.
You've got it. It's just a question you need to add. You've got it, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming very close to the end of our time here. And actually, Ben, I'm going to ask you one last question. And that is, you've just obviously learned a lot, right? You've just done this big mapping process. You probably learned a lot, had a few ahas. Is there one thing that really stuck out to you as like, this is a great pro tip or something that I think is really important to share with other people because for whatever reason you found it to be really informative? Something about your experience.
I think one of the things that stands out the most, someone's typing and not on mute, is how incredibly rich the set of data and information and sort of capacities are that a map like this reveals, and that it's not just sort of this artifact that you look at and you spend a few minutes poking around in. There is enormous potential to proactively try to use that information in different ways, and it requires a team and time and thinking about it, and the map, what you want to map will evolve from that to some degree, but it is so rich that my guess is in general, in most cases we're only scratching the surface of how to use this data. And I just look at sort of the party game I created at the end kind of on a whim, and where things like that could go. Particularly if you're focused on things like building relationships, on network weaving, and convening in different ways, and using this to figure out who do we want to talk with whom. There's just so much to work with, and I'm really excited about iteratively doing this over the next couple of editions to see who wants to show up and play that game together, and what a whole team of network weavers could do.
Ben, would you be willing to put in the link to your video in the chat? Ben created this off the cuff scenario about how he was using the map to build relationships. It's really wonderfully done and very instructive.
So, Sarah, do you want to comment on sticking around after for a half hour if people want to, or?
Yeah, I was going to segue to that right now. But first off, before we even do that, I really want to thank you, Ben, for sharing today. I really hope you share again, because I'm really curious what the next iteration of the map is going to look like. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I like.
My pleasure. I'm just so grateful that to Tim and Christine and Jim for offering this and supporting me and using it.
Yeah, and you've been really creative in your use of it, so that's been really fun to watch. Sort of a totally different angle on what to do with it in the context. So it's been valuable to us. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. I wrote down some ideas as you were talking. So all right. Then to reiterate what I had said at the beginning of this conversation today is that we do have an extra half hour if if folks would like to stick around. We're happy to hold space for an informal conversation, and it could be related to any sort of mapping topic that you'd like to dive into. And I am kind of curious, like who on the